The railway carriage stands alone, hidden away within the depths of the old shunting yards, sat resting on tracks that ultimately now lead nowhere. As he's motioned to enter, Lessing notes the open disdain which the staff officer regards his unkempt and jaded appearance. The first thing that strikes him is how detached from the meeting the colonel appears. His face gaunt, eyes staring off into an undefined place, seemingly focused on nothing. In clipped tones, his deputy announces the reason for this audience. The colonel's son has been listed as missing. A junior officer, attached to the 14th Panzer, his unit has not now been heard of since the dead were first encountered. Sergeant Lessing and his men are to enter the city, to locate and retrieve him, and return him to the colonel. When the NCO has the temerity to ask why the lives of his men should have less value than this one officer, the adjutant explodes in rage. His rant is stopped, however, partway through, as the colonel silently stands, producing a folded sheet of paper from his tunic, which he hands to the soldier. For a few moments, Lessing reads the words written on the letter he holds before he salutes and hastily departs the carriage. With the exception of Werner, none of the other men under Sergeant Lessing's command started this battle as infantrymen. They are all that remains now of their original units, now long since lost in battle to stop the living dead from overrunning their lines. Tankers, flak gunners, a couple of Hiwis, and then Beck, the SS man. They sit now and listen with a mixture of disbelief and anger as he explains their task. And when he has finished speaking, there is only silence. Surprisingly, it is Werner who then objects. This protest dies, however, when the sergeant explains what was written on the letter that the colonel has presented him with. In a few hours, the last remaining Luftwaffe transports are scheduled to leave. If they can return with the colonel's son, they will get to leave the city. It only takes a moment for the enormity of this revelation to sink in, before the squad hurriedly reach for their packs and their helmets. And in that moment, Lessing almost pities the dead, because God himself could not now stop these men. In a stroke of ridiculously poor fortune, they lose Werner in the first hour of their journey, the corporal badly twisting his ankle whilst traversing a pile of loose rubble. After some brief negotiation, he refuses to be escorted back to their lines, instead seating himself against a wall, stating he'll be waiting for them when they return. It takes another 2 hours to find what they are looking for, the 3 abandoned Mark IVs, the only signifier of where the men of the 14th Panzer met their end. Maybe it was his prior service in these vehicles, or purely his haste to finish this mission, but it's here they lose Wolf, dragged to his death by a pair of skeletal arms which take hold of him, as he leans in through the hatch on the only one of the 3 tanks that's been left insecure. Once he and his killer have later been dispatched, it's confirmed the colonel's son is not inside the vehicle, or anywhere nearby. Splitting down into teams, Lessing then directs his men along the most obvious routes the dead and their victims would have taken to leave this place. Not long after they part ways, the sergeant and those with him hear several bursts of gunfire, coming from the direction he had sent Beck's group. This distraction in turn causes the loss of Aslan, who has been bitten on the arm by a ghoul he didn't notice emerge from a doorway he was standing next to. Choking back his tears of anguish, the Hiwi requests a stick grenade, before slowly making his way off out of sight, along a side street. The dull crump of the grenade's detonation, several minutes later, signifying he has found the dead in sufficient numbers to deem it time to end his life. They press on, losing 2 more of their number in the process, silently dispatching countless shambling horrors they encounter with their bayonets. It's Lessing himself who first spots the bedraggled figure shuffling towards them, dressed in the black uniform of a Panzer lieutenant. Working quickly, they subdue the unfortunate soul, tying a thick leather belt around his mouth and another around his hands. Having arrived back at the abandoned tanks, They then wait a further hour for either of the other groups to return, but neither does. And when they reach the edge of the city, they find Werner, the bodies of 8 ghouls lying around him, his last bullet having been saved for himself. Ordering what little remains of his command to wait for him, Lessing takes hold of the Colonel's son, forcing him up into the train carriage. Tears began to stream down the old man's eyes as he witnesses what his only child has now become. He rises from behind his desk, walking silently across to the sergeant, taking the letter that is offered, signing it and returning it. Then the old man offers his hand, thanking the NCO for his sacrifice, wishing him the best for when he arrives back in Germany. Lessing nods, respectfully, before turning on his heel, making his way out into the yard, motioning for his men to fall in step behind him. They have only travelled a short distance when a single gunshot sounds from within the carriage, but Lessing does not pause. He's still hurrying towards the yard exit and towards his freedom when the second shot echoes out from the carriage behind them.